Γεια σας. Και σήμερα θα κάνουμε ένα reaction βίντεο. Λοιπόν, θα κάνουμε reaction βίντεο σε ένα κανάλι που λέγεται TED Ed. Λοιπόν, για να σας δείξω αυτό που πρέπει να κάνετε σε αυτό το κανάλι. Αυτό, εγγραφή. Τέλος πάντων, ας συνεχίσουμε. Το πρώτο βίντεο που θα δούμε είναι The Rise and Fall of the Byzantine Empire. Αυτό δεν ξέρω, γιατί γράφει ένα όνομα. Ίσως αυτό έβασε την ιδέα ή narration. Δεν ξέρω. Okay.
Most history books will tell you the Roman Empire fell in the 5th century CE, but this would have come as a great surprise to the millions of people who lived in the Roman Empire up through the Middle Ages. This medieval Roman Empire, which we usually refer to today as the Byzantine Empire, began in 330 CE. That's when Constantine, the first Christian emperor, moved the capital.
Λοιπόν, ο Κωνσταντίνος, ναι, αλλά όμως στην αρχή νομίζω ότι δεν ήταν. Κανονικά, για αυτοί που πρέπει να πούνε, θα είναι η Ελένη που βρήκε τον Τίμο στον δρόμο. Είμαι σίγουρος ότι θα έπρεπε να πούνε για αυτήν. Και όχι για τον Κωνσταντίνο, επειδή αυτός έγινε πιο μετά χριστιανός.
Of the Roman Empire to a new city called Constantinople, which he founded on the site of the ancient Greek city Byzantium. When the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 and the empire's western provinces were conquered by barbarians, Constantine's eastern capital remained the seat of the Roman emperors. There, generations of emperors ruled for the next 11 centuries. Sharing continuity with the classical Roman Empire gave the Byzantine Empire a technological and artistic advantage over its neighbors, whom Byzantines considered barbarians. In the 9th century, visitors from beyond the frontier were astonished at the graceful stone arches and domes of the imperial palace in Constantinople. A pair of golden lions flanked the imperial throne. A hidden organ would make the lions roar as guests fell on their knees. Golden birds sung from a nearby golden tree. Medieval Roman engineers even used hydraulic engines to raise the imperial throne high into the air. Other inherited aspects of ancient Roman culture could be seen in emperors' clothing, from traditional military garb to togas, and in the courts, which continued to use Roman law. Working-class Byzantines would have also had similar lives to their ancient Roman counterparts. Many farmed or plied a specific trade, such as ceramics, leatherworking, fishing, weaving, or manufacturing silk. But of course, the Byzantine Empire didn't just rest on the laurels of ancient Rome. Their artists innovated, creating vast mosaics and ornate marble carvings. Their architects constructed numerous churches, one of which, called Hagia Sophia, had a dome so high it was said to be hanging on a chain from heaven. The empire was also home to great intellectuals, such as Anna Komnene. As imperial princess in the 12th century, Anna dedicated her life to philosophy and history. Her account of her father's reign is historians' foremost source for Byzantine political history at the time of the First Crusade. Another scholar, Leo the mathematician, invented a system of beacons that ran the width of the empire, what's now Greece.
Mathematician, mathematicός. Δεν μπορείς να... αν μου πει κάποιος δεν ήταν μαθηματικός, ήταν κάτι άλλο, εγώ θα πω δεν με νοιάζει, μαθηματικός, mathematician το λένε.
And Turkey. Stretching more than 700 kilometers, this system allowed the edge of the empire to warn the emperor of invading armies within 1 hour of sighting them at the border. But their advances couldn't protect the empire forever. In 1203, an army of French and Venetian crusaders made a deal with a man named Alexios Angelos. Alexios was the son of a deposed emperor and promised the crusaders vast riches and support to help him retake the throne from his uncle. Alexios succeeded, but after a year the population rebelled, and Alexios himself was deposed and killed. So Alexios's unpaid army turned their aggression on Constantinople. They lit massive fires which destroyed countless works of ancient and medieval art and literature, leaving about 1/3 of the population homeless. The city was reclaimed 50 years later by the Roman Emperor Michael Palaeologus, but his restored empire never regained all the territory the Crusaders had conquered. Finally, in 1453, Ottoman Emperor Mehmed the Conqueror captured Constantinople, bringing a conclusive end to the Roman Empire. Despite the Ottoman conquest, many Greek-speaking inhabitants of the Eastern Mediterranean continued to call themselves Romans until the early 21st century. In fact, it wasn't until the Renaissance that the term Byzantine Empire was first used. For Western Europeans, the Renaissance was about reconnecting with the wisdom of antiquity, and since the existence of a medieval Roman Empire suggested there were Europeans who'd never lost touch with antiquity, Western Europeans wanted to draw clear lines between the ages. To better distinguish the classical Latin-speaking pagan Roman Empire from the medieval Greek-speaking Christian Roman Empire, scholars renamed the latter group Byzantines, and thus, 100 years after it had fallen, the Byzantine Empire was born.
Okay. Ας δούμε και το άλλο, ένα άλλο βίντεο. Ας δούμε για έναν άλλο Ρωμαίο. Και αυτό... Τι είναι αυτό? Not sponsored. Not sponsored. Όχι απλά για διαφήμιση. Το Samsung δεν έκανε sponsor.
As the warrior slept, a snake coiled around his face. Instead of a threat, his wife saw an omen, a fearsome power that would lead her husband to either glory or doom. For now, however, he was only a slave, one of millions taken from the territories conquered by Rome to work the mines, till the fields, or fight for the crowd's entertainment. A nomadic Thracian from what is now Bulgaria, he had served in the Roman army but was imprisoned for desertion. His name was Spartacus. Spartacus had been brought to Capua by Batiatus, a lanista, or trainer of gladiators, and life at the ludus, or gladiator school, was unforgiving. New recruits were forced to swear an oath to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword, and to obey their master's will without question. But even harsh discipline couldn't break Spartacus's spirit. In 73 BCE, Spartacus led 73 other slaves to seize knives and skewers from the kitchen and fight their way out, hijacking a wagon of gladiator equipment along the way. They were done fighting for others. Now, they fought for their freedom. When the news reached Rome, the Senate was too busy with wars in Spain and the Pontic Empire to worry about some unruly slaves. Unconcerned, Praetor Claudius Glaber took an army of 3,000 men to the rebels' refuge at Mount Vesuvius and blocked off the only passage up the mountain. All that remained was to wait and starve them out, or so he thought. In the dead of night, the rebels lowered themselves down the cliffside on ropes made from vines and flanked Glaber's unguarded camp. Thus began the legend of Rome's defiant gladiator. As news of the rebellion spread, its ranks swelled with escaped slaves, deserting soldiers, and hungry peasants. Many were untrained, but Spartacus's clever tactics transformed them into an effective guerrilla force. A second Roman expedition led by Praetor Verinius was ambushed while the officer bathed. To elude the remaining Roman forces, the rebels used their enemies' corpses as decoy guards, stealing Verinius's own horse to aid their escape. Thanks to his inspiring victories and policy of distributing spoils equally, Spartacus continued attracting followers and gained control of villages where new weapons could be forged. The Romans soon realized they were no longer facing ragtag fugitives, and in the spring of 72 BCE, the Senate retaliated with the full force of 2 legions. The rebels left victorious, but many lives were lost in the battle, including Spartacus's lieutenant, Crixus. To honor him, Spartacus held funeral games, forcing his Roman prisoners to play the role his fellow rebels had once endured. By the end of 72 BCE, Spartacus's army was a massive force of roughly 120,000 members, but those numbers proved difficult to manage. With the path to the Alps clear, Spartacus wanted to march beyond Rome's borders, where his followers would be free. But his vast army had grown brash. Many wanted to continue pillaging, while others dreamed of marching on Rome itself. In the end, the rebel army turned south, foregoing what would be their last chance at freedom. Meanwhile, Marcus Licinius Crassus had assumed control of the war. As Rome's wealthiest citizen, he pursued Spartacus with 8 new legions, eventually trapping the rebels in the toe of Italy. After failed attempts to build rafts and a stinging betrayal by local pirates, the rebels made a desperate run to break through Crassus's lines, but it was no use. Roman reinforcements were returning from the Pontic Wars, and the rebels' ranks and spirits were broken. In 71 BCE, they made their last stand. Spartacus nearly managed to reach Crassus before being cut down by centurions. His army was destroyed, and 6,000 captives were crucified along the Appian Way, a haunting demonstration of Roman authority. Crassus won the war, but it is not his legacy which echoes through the centuries. Thousands of years later, the name of the slave who made the world's mightiest empire tremble has become synonymous with freedom and the courage to fight for it.
Τέλειο βίντεο. Ας πάμε στο τελευταίο μας. Η δίδυμη που... Για να το δούμε αυτό το βίντεο.
Day after day, the twin brothers Hun and Wukuf ran back and forth playing ball. One day, their vigorous game disturbed the lords of the underworld, who challenged the twins to a match. But when the brothers arrived, the lords trapped and killed them, hanging Hun's head from a tree as a trophy. The tree soon sprouted massive fruit, which caught the attention of one of the lord's daughters. When she reached for it, the skull of Hun spat on her hand and impregnated her. Fleeing her father's wrath, she sought refuge with her mother-in-law and gave birth to twin sons, Hunahpu and Ixbalanque. The second generation of twins discovered their father's ball game equipment, which...
Αυτό είναι μεξικό. Aztec. Γιατί δεν το βλέπω ιταλικό, δεν. Όχι. Αποκλείεται να είναι κινέζικο. Aztec. Μεξικό.
Their grandmother had hidden and began to play. Soon enough, the messengers from the underworld arrived to issue another challenge. Knowing what had happened to their fathers, the twins nevertheless answered the call, trekking through deep caverns and across rivers filled with scorpions, blood, and pus, until they reached the great city from which the lords of the underworld controlled every aspect of nature and caused suffering for humans. The twins pressed on, searching for the lords who had challenged them. The lords had hidden among statues of themselves to confuse their guests, but the brothers sent a mosquito ahead of them. When it stung the figures, the lords cried out, revealing themselves. They forced the twins to spend the night in the House of Darkness. They gave them a torch, but warned they must return it unburnt or face death. As the darkness closed in, the quick-thinking brothers adorned the torch with red macaw feathers and fireflies. Come morning, the lords were shocked to see the torch lit but unburnt. They insisted on playing the game with their own ball. The twins agreed, only to find that the lords had hidden a weapon inside the ball, which chased them around the court, trying to kill them. The twins survived that first round, but by now they were sure this would be no ordinary match. They played many more rounds, and each time the twins scored no better than a tie, leaving them to face whatever supernatural trial the Lord set for them before picking up the game again. They survived the House of Cold by lighting a fire, and the House of Jaguars by feeding bones to the beasts. But in the House of Bats, a bat bit off Hunahpu's head. Certain they now had the advantage, the lords called for another round of the ballgame, hanging Hunahpu's head over the court. The quick-thinking Ixbalanque called the animals to him. A turtle brought him a chilacayote squash, and he carved it into the likeness of a head. While the lords chased the ball, he swapped it with the head. With Hunahpu's head back on his body, the twins played harder than...
Φαντάσου κάποιος να σου έκλειψε το κεφάλι. Έχεις πεθάνει. Όχι. Παίρνεις το κεφάλι σου. Το βάζεις πίσω. Καλή ιδέα.
Ever. Finally, they won the game, hitting the hanging squash so it shattered on the ground. The twins knew their treacherous hosts would not take the loss well. To protect themselves, they enlisted a pair of seers. Sure enough, the lords burned the brothers in an oven, but the seers made sure their remains were thrown in the river, which restored them to life. The brothers then came before the lords disguised as two disheveled children and began to dance and perform miracles. For their final trick, Ixbalanque pretended to kill Hunahpu, then resurrect him. The lords were so delighted that they demanded the same trick be performed on them. Still in disguise, the brothers were only too happy to oblige and began killing the lords one by one. As the surviving lords realized who stood before them and that no resurrection was forthcoming, they begged for mercy, and the twins spoke their curse. Henceforth, the lords would have no sacrifices and no power over the surface world. Their days of terrorizing humans were over.
Καλό.
While the hero twins were vanquishing the lord...
Συνήθως. Οκ, ας δούμε αυτό για το τελευταίο βίντεο.
Το αγαπημένο σου φυλάδιο είναι ο Live. Ανακάλυψε ακόμα περισσότερο.
Τελείωσε μια φορά να κάνεις sponsor. Οκ, το τελευταίο μας βίντεο. Δεν ασχολούμαι.
Chak-Ek rose from the underworld to the surface of the eastern sea and on into the heavens. His brother, K'in-Ahau, followed. Though Chak-Ek had risen first, K'in-Ahau outshone him, and the resentful Chak-Ek descended back to the underworld to plot against his brother. In Mayan mythology, Chak-Ek represents Venus, and K'in-Ahau represents the sun. Known as both the morning and the evening star, Venus moves through the sky, sometimes visible before sunrise, sometimes after sunset, and occasionally not at all. The ancient Maya identified this roughly 584-day cycle more than 1,000 years ago, and it still accurately predicts when and where Venus will appear in the sky around the world. 5 of these cycles make up almost exactly 8 years, and the Maya also recognize this larger cycle. They assigned Chak-Ek 5 different forms, one for each cycle of Venus that were repeated every 8 years. Within the 584-day cycle, Venus is visible in the evening sky for 250 days, then disappears for 8 days before reappearing as the morning star. The ancient Maya ascribed particular significance to this point in the cycle, the first time Venus appears before sunrise after being invisible. On this day, Chak-Ek rose again from the underworld, wielding a spear thrower and darts. To bring discord to the world, he decided to attack his brother and his brother's allies. His first target was Kahwil, god of sustenance and lightning. Rising in the late rainy season, Chak-Ek aimed his spear and struck Kahwil, causing damage to the food and a period of chaos in the social order until Kahwil was reborn. 584 days after attacking Kahwil, Chak-Ek turned his attention back to his brother, the sun. Each night, the sun took the form of jaguar and journeyed through the underworld. Chak-Ek speared the jaguar sun as it rose at dawn towards the end of the dry season. The sun was wounded, plunging the world into a period of chaos and warfare. Chak-Ek's third victim was the god of maize, who provided sustenance for all humankind. Chak-Ek speared him at the time of the harvest. He was buried in the underworld, and maize, the staple of life, was no longer available to Earth's inhabitants. But the maize god emerged after 3 months in the place of new beginnings, the eastern cave known as Seven Water Place, bringing food once again to Earth. When the turtle Aknak rose in the sky to mark the summer solstice, Chak-Ek claimed his fourth victim. With the death of this good omen, the sun, the food supply, and the people were buried within the earth, and the forces of chaos reigned. But out of the chaos rose a new order established by Hun Ahau, one of the hero twins known to all for having vanquished the lords of the underworld. A new race of humans was created, made from maize. This state of balance was not to last, however. Chak-Ek's fifth and final victim was a mysterious stranger from the west, and his death in the heart of the dry season shook the order established by Hun Ahau. The gods, the lords, and the maize were buried in the underworld. But this victory for Chak-Ek would also prove temporary. The two brothers, Venus and the Sun, were caught in an endless cycle as they battled for supremacy, reenacting the same 5 struggles, while the world alternated between order and chaos with the rising of the morning star. Want more myths? Follow Hercules and
Oké, dat was wel maar zo de video.